Police have fired rubber bullets and tear gas to disperse angry protesters thronging the streets of Spain. Dozens of people injured and a number of activists detained during the latest nationwide anti-austerity demonstrations. In a major show of strength, hundreds of thousands have been taking part in the protests. People marched in 80 cities across the country to protest against more suffocating austerity which is to come. It's all after the German parliament gave the green light to the €100 billion bailout for the country's battered banks. The EU's finance ministers are now expected to approve the conditions for the financial lifeline to Madrid. Let's get some more details on this now and talk to Carlos Declos, sociologist at Pompey Fabra University. Thank you for coming on RT today. So now that it is that the Spanish banks are being bailed out here, people are in for more bitter austerity that's been hitting for quite some time now. I mean, is it fair to say this is a vicious circle? When will it come to an end?
Well, it's really hard to say when it's going to come to an end. I mean, and it's certainly a vicious spiral, because what we're seeing is a massive transfer of private debt into public debt, and that's where it really begins to harm the actual citizens of Spain. These plans are not even being done on a large enough scale to really have any effect. Any positive effect for sort of working people in Spain. It's just something that's going to, basically, like I said several weeks ago, it's just an effort to buy up toxic assets that have no value, never had any value, and have actually been, the tool through which citizens in this country have been conned. Well, let's
talk about just for a moment here that the true reaction of the people in Spain and the protests there, unlike those in Greece, traditionally quite peaceful. That is, until now, but with no end to the crisis in sight, is there a danger that tempers will boil over again? I mean, why is it that normally law-abiding people are now basically turning violent? I mean, some people calling them hooligans.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because their very livelihoods are what's at stake. I mean, the people, when you take their food, you take all that they have, you take their homes, they respond quite viscerally. I mean, yesterday, what we saw in Madrid, for instance, wasn't violent anarchists in a group that decided to burn a bunch of dumpsters. What we saw were police charging against other police, protesting police. We saw them charging against firemen and women. We saw them working against charging against public sector workers and chasing them through the streets of Madrid. And neighborhoods in Madrid, the actual people that lived there were actually throwing flower pots from the balconies at the police. Now that's a qualitative change from what we've seen over the last year in Spain. Certainly.
Well, it's certainly a change as you say it, though. I do know that last year during the Occupy movement in America, in New York, we had some examples of the police actually crossing the line and joining that of the protesters. Now let's for a moment look at the issue of unemployment in Spain. It's the highest in all of the EU, 25% unemployment. Here comes another €100 billion. Do tell us something here. Where's this money going?
It's just going to buy toxic assets. I mean, that's all it's doing. It's money that's being sort of thrown as it's a very small patch over a massive gaping hole, and that gaping hole is private sector debt. It's private sector debt that is the result of a housing bubble and the result of banks trafficking in toxic assets like the preferred shares, which are financial instruments that are typically reserved for experts, but they started selling them to older folks with Alzheimer's and provoking a small-scale run on the banks by not allowing, for instance, 80-year-old retired folks to access their savings and putting 10-year blocks on those. Well,
that's just it. We need to address the issue of the social impact here, because as we have €100 billion coming into Spain, basically from the Eurocrats in Brussels, we're looking at austerity measures, pensions going down, all sorts of benefits going down. What about the social impact? Take us to that part, will you?
The social impact is massive. I mean, the social impact is misery. I mean, the reason I guess I don't want to expound on it that much is because I think it's kind of obvious if you're here. I mean, you see people living in ATM buildings, right, in little ATM services, and you see them living out in the streets, looking in the trash, for food. I mean, these are people that 2 years ago were working, okay, and they were working and maintaining families, and now their very livelihoods are threatened, and of course tensions are going to boil over. I mean, I think what's surprising is that we've gone a whole year and really seen mostly peaceful protests, but what's happening now at the social level is, last year we were talking about the indignados. Now it's not just the indignados. Now it's public sector workers. It's really all of society that's coming together. That's why you had over 1 million people in the streets yesterday, and that's why you had, actual fractures opening up within the actual state structure.
Well, I mean, it truly is. It's absolutely astonishing. As you say, upwards of 1 million people out onto the streets. As we've been talking, we've been showing these pictures here of basically Molotov cocktails, shops on fire, all sorts of people breaking through barrier lines. The social levels you've addressed there, but what about the political levels as well? Because many have been calling for the removal of Prime Minister Rajoy. Is it the question of his personality or of the political system itself that's failing? And frankly, does he have any control? I mean, is his control based in Brussels?
His control is entirely based in Brussels at this point, and I mean, when I say that, it's because there's a real crisis of the institutions in Spain. So no, it's not just limited to his personality. He actually practically has none. He's a perfect Eurocrat in this sense. He's a guy whose main personality is just sort of being the guy who lost to Zapatero 2 times. But beyond that, what we're seeing is, judges caught up in corruption scandals for using public money to kind of have 20 party weekends, right? That's the head of the equivalent to like the Supreme Court or whatever. Then we have bankers that are on trial as well, with 33 members of Bankia, for instance, on trial, who have been members and ministers of the government. I think
certainly when you look at the amount of people on the streets, and then you talk about these people in the upper levels who are being held to account, perhaps at some point at the end of the day, maybe some people will be held to account. Carlos Teclos, sociologist at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, live on RT. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.